Andrew's a great friend of mine. We've known each other for years and years, but I never knew that he was interested in the wars.
I didn't either.
He didn't either, until I happened to see Scott Thompson's name on a burial memorial. And I knew it couldn't be Scott Thompson from here. So I got in touch with him, and that was the end of the story. I've always found the memorial in the church as being very, very interesting. Because we all know the Thompsons. The Thompsons. The Thompsons there, whose names are in, there's 3 names in the grave up in the burial ground. But I didn't know who the rest of them were. And I put out on our website, but nobody else seemed to know who they were either. But now, Andrew has really looked into it. He has a mine of information, and he is more than willing to answer any questions at the end. So, please enjoy.
That's grand. I started many years ago, about 10 years ago, going out to the First World War battlefields, and it was there that I started to get a passion for finding out who they were in the grave and so on. And I've been going out regularly. David and I go out regularly to the battlefields of both the Somme and Flanders. And it was actually Charles Thompson, not Scott, where he's at. We come across, we go out at night walking, and it was a strange treat to have. You go to assembly at night rather than go to the pub. Yes, we were more sensible. So we came across this Charles Wilson in Rampart Cemetery in Ypres, and I had put up the post on a friend of mine on Facebook who suggested I have some information on it for young races, so we put it up, and that's how Jackie got to know me. The Charles Thompson here was ex-RIC.
Alright.
I'll take you there for myself. I'll stand back here out of the way. So, Charles and Scott were brothers. I'll go through a few of them because a lot of it is work in progress, but the main ones that we're concentrating on will be the ones who are killed in prison. As you probably knew, Scott and Charles were both born in Gracehill. They were Moravian, and Scott worked in the bleaching mill, which was originally Gallagher's, and Charles was a millwright, which I'm assuming there was a carpentry trade either attached to a bleaching mill, or they actually made threshing mills and cartwheels and all that sort of stuff. So obviously Charles decided that he decided something else. So he joined the RIC, but he wasn't in it very long until he was discharged medically. We're not sure why, but it was recommended that he join the Navy. So he joined the various ships and ended up on the HMS Vanguard, who fought in the Battle of Jutland. And unfortunately, when they were in Scarborough Flow in the 9th of July 1917, there was a catastrophic explosion in the magazine room, and the ship went down within minutes. There was 845 souls on board, and there's only 2 survived. Charles was one of the ones who didn't survive. Scott Thompson then, Charles is actually commemorated on the Cheltenham War Memorial in London, because he has no known grave. But the wreck is in Scarborough Flow. It sits in about 110 feet of water, and it's now one of those military protected graves. Scott Thompson, as I say, he worked over in the mill, 35 years of age, and he lived at home with Mum. And although the political landscape at that time, I'm not doing something right here, Sean. That's just nice. Although the political landscape at that time was changing, Home Rule was a big thing. Scott did sign the Ulster Covenant, but he didn't join the UVF. But he did feel that it was important, as most people at that time, that when if war came, that he would join it. And he did join up. And he joined the local battalion, which was the 12th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles, and went to Candigoy Camp. Back here. Candigoy Camp, as you can see, the top itself is Gravel Tower. So he trained there, went out to France, fought in the Somme, and was killed. Was actually lucky enough not to be killed. After that battle, he came back. They went to St. Omer, where they convalesced for a few weeks, and then they were sent to the Ypres front up near a place called Wichita, and it was a front near Messines, which they actually stayed there for most of that winter until the battle would start. So back here, I'll do this. So we'll move on to charging energy. Robert Craig was one of those guys who moved away, emigrated to Canada. A lot of the actual Joseph Lennox, Andrew Lennox, also emigrated to Canada, and they found other work elsewhere. The Thomas Reid was the other one then. He was born in Graystill, but moved to Belfast and was married, became a sergeant in the 15th Battalion, Royal Irish Rifles, and he fought from basically from the inception of the battalion right through, and was killed in action in the 20th of the 10th, 1918. He was killed in action, and he's buried in Harley.
Just before the end of the war.
Just before the end of the war. So he basically went for nearly 4 years without being killed. And if you bear in mind, the 20th of the 10th, 1918 was what, 3 weeks from the war's end. So many of ours are born in the village where doing a sort of work in motion. Thomas McNeil was actually born here, but he lived in Ballymena, and he was a surveyor, and he joined the Labour Corps. So we think that he would have been out to survey the ground after the cessation of the war, and would have used his talent for that. One that sort of gave us a bit of fun was Jean McClure. We couldn't find Jean anywhere, but I found her on a ship's list coming bound from America. It listed her as a reserve nurse, Jean McClure, and it was ANC, which is the Army Nursing Corps. So we believe that she possibly either moved to immigrate to America and was part of a contingent of replacement nurses bound for either England or Europe. So we're currently working on those ones. May Wilson, VAD, Voluntary Aid Detachment, you have 2 ladies there. Charlotte at that age was probably around 50 years of age when the war broke out, so she would have probably helped out. There was auxiliaries to cook and clean and care for the various in the various hospitals and so on. But we believe that May Wilson was actually in the front because we have an actual war medal. She got a British Service War medal, so we're checking to make sure that she actually did fight out there, because the problem with the actual records, we had a couple of instances over the last 100 years where a lot of the records were destroyed. A lot of the records in Dublin during the 20s were destroyed by fire and bomb, and then also a lot of the records in England during the Blitz in London in 1940 were also firebombed with the Germans. So it's hard to sometimes to try and tie those things up. But that's the list. You'll find that May Wilson is actually Charles, James and Samuel's sister. Brother Thomas Wilson we're working on, as I say, William Ramsey, John Stone's the same. As I say, it's a work in progress. But say the political landscape at that time changed, and there was a big contingent in the area of UBF, but as I say, Scott and the others didn't join them, as we can find out. When war broke out, the problem was that the leaders here were more interested in talking about what was happening here. The interest in England was of what was happening here, but then on the 28th of June 1914, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne was assassinated in Sarajevo, and then the July crisis created the war when Belgium was invaded, and Lord Kitchener famously the poster was put up to get volunteers. The problem with the British Army at that time, it was very small. We had sort of around about 200,000 men on it. Over 20,000 of those were from Irish regiments. I'll show you the demographic picture. This was how Ireland looked, and if you lived in counties Antrim and Down, you joined the Rifles, Royal Irish Rifles. You then had the Royal Irish Fusiliers, which had other counties, Monaghan, Callan, Donegal, Monaghan, Callan, Armagh, and then you had the Royal Unskilled Fusiliers, which pulled from counties Londonderry, Tyrone and Donegal. And they basically created another 11 battalions, plus there's the reserve battalions. I often wonder if how the House of Commons thought about the two armed militia in Ireland, because the thing we discovered was that armed militias were not uncommon, and Edward Carson found a legal loophole, because a militia could be formed, was paid, and then disbanded at will when there was insurrections. So they were able to form their Irish Volunteer Force, or the Ulster Volunteer Force, with no legal law or consequence. So I'm sure probably when war broke out that the leaders of the two, Carson and Redmond, thought it was maybe a bit of a breathing space, so many of the volunteers joined up because of they thought that the greater likes of the Ulster Volunteers, it was John Redmond saying, your duty is to the greater rather than home rule. And the same with the Ulster Volunteer Force. Carson encouraged them to go and fight for the cause. These are the various camps that the men would have went to. Randallstown's not far from here. Again, it was connected to the railway, so therefore many of the divisions, particularly there if you look at the 10th Battalion, Service Battalion, Royal Irish, Royal Unskilled Fusiliers, they trained in Finner Camp in Donegal, and they actually marched from Finner Camp to Londonderry, through Lifford, and up into Londonderry itself. They then followed the various towns, Coleraine, Garba, right through to Randallstown. They walked the whole way. They finished up here in Randallstown, where they would have further trained. It was all train to get them to a great standard. Again, that's the Finner Camp. You can see that there wasn't too many huts in Finner Camp. It was all tents, and they spent the winter 1914-15 in tents and trained. Of course, the soldiers usually have to spend their time in Mother Earth, as they say. Again, that's a bigger view of Finner Camp itself. Ballykinler, a lot of the Belfast Battalion would have went to there, the 8th, the 9th, the 10th, and the 15th all would have went there to train. Eventually, Scott Thompson would have went to Clannyboy, which is where the training camp was. The Marquis of Dufferin allowed them the ground, and hence the reason why eventually the Ulster Tower would be used as a memorial, because most of these guys trained in the area where the Ulster Tower was donated. I think it was in commemoration of Lady Helen, if I'm right. This is the actual battlefield itself. This is what Scott Thompson and many of the Irish division, Ulster Division would have come across. All the red lines there are actually the German trenches. And I'll take the next one. That's your Thiepval Wood. That's where all the men were assembled prior to the battle. As you can see, they had actually listed out the 108th, which was part of the battalion of the 12th. It's actually ironic that the 9th Battalion, Royal Irish Fusiliers, and the 12th Battalion, Royal Irish Rifles fought together down near the Ankara, if you spotted it. See, it was up here and over there. So on the day of the battle, Scott Thompson and there's James Bell, who was from Achillee, Garth McGowan, who was a Moravian as well, were fighting across the battlefields. Unfortunately, James was killed, but Scott was one of those victims. We reckon, certainly I would reckon that
Sorry, where's the 12th battalion?
the 12th would have been, as I say, the 12th battalion would have been further down. This is just to sort of to give you an indication of the feet forward. So the way they worked it was, right there. Right. The Faithful Wood, what they did was the marker point for each of the brigades was basically here. You'll see 10th, that's just the Derrys, the 9th battalion was the Tyrones, and the 11th, which was the Donegals, all fought up towards the Swelling Redoubt. The 11th and 13th were Ballyclare, Southampton men, and the 12th was Ballymena men, and they all fought across that. Why I brought this one up was because that's where the Ulster Tower is now, and this is the reason why.
You were 14th?
The 14th Battalion was YCB, they were part of the 107th. They were in reserve in the actual wood itself, along with the rest. There was the 8th Battalion, East Belfast, the West Belfast 9th, and the 10th South Belfast, and they were all within the wood, and they were in reserve waiting to go forward. The 8th and 9th were picked as the actual men to go forward on the day. You'll see there where they created saps. This is where they dug out, and on the morning of the 1st of July, many of the men lay across this road before dawn. So when they came up, they then had they had a fighting chance to get out. They ran up towards the Swelling Redoubt, all through past Mildred Cemetery. But again, the photograph doesn't show the where the actual 12 fought, but I have it in my file. The Swelling Redoubt was the main area that had to be fought and taken. If you notice those are all the dugouts, all with machine guns. Now, if you consider the number of men that were killed on the day, there's 5,500 casualties. Each one of those was machine gun with an MG3, which could spit out 500 rounds a minute. So within an hour, you can imagine how many bullets was flying. Never mind the artillery. So, with the fact that Scott made it through the day as others did, 5,500 casualties out of the 36th Ulster Division, which was something like over 20,000 men. It was quite a high casualty rate. Now, after the battle, the 12th men all moved up to Silvermore for rest and relaxation, refit, and their next task was the Battle of the Seams. Now, this is actually the Battle of Langmark, but the Battle of the Seams went very well for most battalions. There was plenty of casualties, but they fought it in good weather. They had a good general who planned everything out, General Plummer, and he was good to his men. He says, get the men rested, get them well fed, look after them, and then they fought on the 7th of June 1917. Up went the various explosions. They could be heard as far back as London, and that went very well. So they then decided that they would have a mass attack, and the reason the third Battle of Ypres commenced was because the U-boat threat during the First World War was not just as great as it was in the Second World War, but the two seaside towns that needed was Ostend and Zeebrugge, because those were in Allied hands, and the U-boats were able to come out into the English Channel, and Britain was feared, as it was in the Second World War, but more so as we're talking about the First World War. And their idea was the third Battle of Ypres would go right up round and take the ground and try and minimise the threat of the actual threat of the U-boats. So somebody came up with a great plan. We'll do this, and we'll do it on the 31st of July. It rained heavily. The difference between the Somme and Ypres and Belgium is that the Somme has a lower water table. In Belgium, as soon as you dig into the water, into the ground, you discover water comes up very quick. And the difference between Belgium and the song is they have trench systems in France, the pillboxes in Belgium, because the Germans quickly find, because they took the ground normally quickly, they always went for the highest point, and it gave them plenty of observation, and the pillboxes had to be taken one by one. So the Battle of Langmark is where the 12th Battalion fought, and that's the mud that they had to, between the shell holes and the bombing and so on, the landscape was devastated. Everything the engineers had to build duckboards and so on, so they could actually get between the various places. They reckon many men actually, if they fell into the shell hole, loaded with their uniform, chances are they were doomed. So unfortunately, on the 16th of August 1917, Scott Thompson either disappeared or was blown up. It was a bit chaotic because the difference between General Gough and General Plummer is that Gough hadn't the same forethought, and he hadn't the same care for his men as did Plummer. The men stayed near Brandhoek, which is west of Ypres. They were too close to the line, so rest of men, they didn't get the same rest. They were in rain, everything was going against them. So when they started the battle on 16th of August 1917, they were tired, wet, weary, and the battle floundered very quickly. In the 2 days, they lost 200,000 men. In the whole of the Battle of the Passchendaele, there was nearly 500,000 men. The Passchendaele is actually a group term for many battles, because you had the first and second Battle of the Passchendaele, you had the Battle of Langmark, you had the Battle of Polygon Wood. They were all, various battles were fought by different battalions. So the, as you can see the landscape, this is what they were expected to fight over. So after the war, these were the medals that many of the men got. The classification for them was that particularly the Ulster Division and the 12th Battalion, most of them all landed on the 4th of October 1915 after their training. So they would have automatically received that. That's the 1415 star. This was the British War Medal and then the Victory Medal. So if you actually landed in France between the 5th of August 1914 and the 31st of December 1915, you automatically got those 3 medals. Scott Thompson would have got those. The other medal that would have come up, sorry? Okay. Yeah, that was a memory medal and certificate that all the Ulster Division, there's quite a number of people got. They would come up in the newspapers quite a bit at that time that a certain gentleman won the medal, and this was what they did, which was different to the actual military medal and military crosses and so on that were awarded in England. Another thing that Scott's mother would have received was the death penny, the bronze plaque. Each one of them, there was 1.4 million of these made, and every name, this was obviously Robert Blake, but Scott's name would have been on that as well.
Sorry, did you only get that if you were killed?
Yes, it was only the
guy
it's called,
who was in the explosion on the boat. She wouldn't put one.
we're currently working on his information because the Navy was different. We started a few months back, so there was still quite a bit of work to do. I was keeping David going because he does the tours. I says, "Can you recognise the cemetery?" "Oh, you're trying me out, aren't you?" I says, "Yes." This is actually the first cemetery I went to. It's Carnoy British Cemetery, down in the village of Carnoy, and it's on the road between Tyrone and Albert. And the reason I picked it was because it was the first one I went to. And it's significant too is that if you ever visited Spring Hill House,
Yes.
John Molesworth Lennox Cunningham is buried there. He was the commanding officer of the 6th Connaught Rangers. The Connacht Rangers was actually filled with quite a few of nationalists from West Belfast who didn't want to join the Ulster Division but wanted to fight, and he was a Protestant officer from Gentry. He was from the land of Gentry, and he was well liked and beloved by his men, but he was killed along with his men on the approach to Gilmont on the 6th of September 1916. He's beside a guy, Edward Curzon, who was actually the seal to the Royal Irish Regiment. So there's two lieutenant colonels together in that cemetery. That cemetery actually is most of the cemeteries were all designed, and every bit of the cemetery was designed out, and it was flashed over, fought over. I went to House of Commons, so all the British cemeteries you see are of that format. That's particularly one because it was behind the lines, so there's less unknowns. So there's even Jewish people from Jewish relation there who fought with the British. It's also known that, I know I'm moving slightly away, but the religion, the Jewish community in Germany, there was over 180,000 Jews fought in the German army. There's 12,000 lost their lives, and there's 10,000 of them actually got crosses, the actual iron crosses. The actual cemetery itself was designed out by a team. The headstones are the same no matter where you go, and no matter who you were, you got one headstone. There was no difference. Everybody was equal in just equal in death. If you're a brigadier general or a private, this is what you got. You're allowed to put the descendants, that your family was allowed to put on a small inscription at the bottom of the actual headstone. So this is the 300 graves that are along with the French at the Memorial. Why I put this one up is because James Bell, who was killed in action on 1st of July 1916, is on that memorial, along with 72,500 others. The quite a lot of the men who died on the 1st of July would be on this, but not all, because you look around the battlefield and say, right, where did 5,500 go? Well, many were wounded. There was over 400 taken prisoner by the Germans, who were then shipped back to Germany, and then eventually the actual wounded would have worked their way back from regimental aid posts, main dressing stations, and you can actually follow the trail sometimes of the cemeteries. Forceville was one of them, and Doullens back to the coast. One of the biggest cemeteries in France is Etap. I think there's something like just under 11,500. It's just small, slightly smaller than Tyncott. The Mellingate Memorial is one of the memorials in Belgium, and there's 54,500 names in that. There wasn't enough room in that because the cut-off point for because of the volume, sheer volume, everybody that was killed during the 5th of August 1914 and the 15th of August 1917 are all on this one. The local MP at that time, Captain Bruce O'Neill, is actually on that commemoration. He fought with the Life Guard. British Posiers, this is where the rest of the names are from the song. The Thief Memorial has 72,000. There's roughly about 13,000 names in that one, and that's on the road between Albert and Buchan. This is Tyncott. This is where Scott is commemorated on the wall. It has almost 12,000 graves, something like 8,500 unknowns. You look at the landscape today and you think, where did all this happen? And why did all this happen? The two parts of the trees here and here are small pillboxes. They actually, there's rows upon rows of those because this is where the Germans had to live, and they were there first, so they built their various pillboxes, and each one of those had to be taken individually. It took them months to take the ground. There's nearly 35,000 names on the walls. That is the commemoration wall there. the whole way around, with all the names on it. And Scott Thompson's name somewhere around here. That's the original site of the graveyard, and that was the German blockhouse, which was an observation post. And when King George the Fifth was over visiting the battlefield sites, he suggested you put the cross of sacrifice on top of it, so it was actually there. This is what you would actually class as a concentration graveyard, meaning that they were all brought in from other graveyards. They were quickly buried, if you're lucky enough, and this is the largest one in Belgium, with almost 12,000 graves. The next one is actually the Cheltenham Memorial Park and the monument. Scott Thompson, Scott Thompson's brother, Charles, who went down with the Vanguard, is named on this memorial. Royal Navy, and say I have similar details on the actual memorial itself. This is the type of blockhouse that the Germans had, and as you can see it's full of concrete, so it was going to be a double the job to get through it, round it and top of it. There was rows and rows of those, and if you go back to this, the name Tynecott, the Northumberland Fusiliers, when they were coming through the area, looked at all these white concrete boxes and thought of home. Tynecott came from Tyneside cottages, so that's how they named them, and that's why it was named that way. There's a visitor centre and all into it, and if you ever go with David on one of the tours, he takes you in through this gate rather than through this way here, because normally you've gone through the gate there. He can take you through there, and you just go, oh my goodness. It really is very humbling when you consider. Because if you consider, I think there's something like 2,700,000 casualties in the First World War. The reason why this one up is the Vimy Memorial. It represents Canada and France, the two colours, one for the France Dominion, one for the Canadian Dominion. As you know, Canada was very much French at one time. They have the figures for truth and justice and law. Robert Craig is on this memorial. Robert emigrated to Canada in 1909. He actually went to America first and sought work there, and returned actually along with a special Canadian regiment called the Borden Machine Gun Company, and it was actually literally like it was like a towed vehicle, and the men sat in the back of it. He was killed. Why he's there is because he was killed in the Somme towards the end of the Battle of Somme around September 1916. No known grave, because the Battle of Somme, the Ulster Division and everybody thought was the second battle. The French fought the first battle. You then had the German Spring Offensive in 1918, when the Germans retook the ground and very nearly made it to Amiens. The British said we have to do something about this. So between John Monash and Arthur Currie, they devised a far better plan, and within weeks, from the end of August 1918 to the end of the war, the last 100 days, they took the ground very quickly. The Ulster Tower was one of the first memorial towers to be built. By 1919, a year after the war, the people of Ulster and Belfast had gathered up £5,000 for that tower, and it was built then and opened officially then November 1921. It's exactly the replica of the tower, Helen's Tower in Clandeboy, and it's visited every year by many people. It's the only memorial now that doesn't have names on it, because the Thief Memorial at that stage, this was built long before all the memorial names were put together. But the battlefield clearances took the 6 years, I think it was, before they got all the ground cleared, put the tallies together to work out who was who and what was what and where they were buried. The thing about the names of the missing is there's quite a lot of graves unknown, but at that time there was no indication of who you were. later in the war they decided it would be a good idea to have identification tags. It would be a good idea to have two, one to leave with the body and one to be collected. And the Second World War certainly proved that as well. The actual, this is again the 16th Irish Division. This is up near the village of Gilmon, and it was a stone cross. There's 3 of these manufactured for the southern regiments. The reason I bring this up is because there were still people living, Moravians living in Dublin, and I'm sure if we'll get to the archives at some time, there would many of them would have fought. So they would have fought with the Irish divisions, and there's 3 of those. One of them in Gilmont, one up near what they call White Sheep near Ypres in Belgium, and the other one is out in Serbia. That is the Island of Ireland Peace Tower, which was opened in 1998. It's the only memorial park where all the men from Ireland are commemorated. The 10th Irish, 16th Irish, and 36th Ulster Division. And that's our own one. David says to me about the photographer's not very good. He's leaning off a wee bit. So I apologise for the photograph. I'll get it better the next time. A number of the names is on, particularly from the area, as you know. Some are Moravian, some aren't. So, the aftermath. Thomas Reid, who was a surveyor from Ballymena, lived in Gracehill, or he was born in Gracehill, moved to Belfast, became the sergeant, and he fought, and he's the one that's buried in Harlbeek Cemetery up near Kortrijk in Belgium. His wife and dependent received the grand total of £34, 5 shillings and 4pence. Now, they would have got that in January 1919. The £27, you take that from the £34. The £27 was the war gratuity. That was like his life insurance policy. So that's what he got, or sorry, I should have said, his wife received. And the difference is £7, 5 shillings and 4pence, which was his back pay. He was a sergeant. Okay. Then his wife then received a war pension of 16 shillings and 3pence. She would have probably received that if they had children up to the age of 16. So you can say life was just not only expendable, but it was at a price. Scott Thompson, again, he actually was even worse because he lived at home, and his mother received £1, 7 shillings and 7pence for his back pay, and she was given £10 of a war gratuity in 1919. We think that this here is reading his mother, soul, that was buried into a legitimate person. So, any questions? Hopefully you understood me. It's my first talk, so I can do one-to-one very well, but you see when it comes to the scary factor.
Andrew, the first slide of the memorial of the Great Assembly, it shows the dates 1914 to 1919. Why 1919?
1919, after as you know, the 1918 was armistice. It didn't mean that the war was over. What happened, a lot of the soldiers, when they thought they were getting home, were put on what they called Class Z registration, or reserve, meaning that if Germany didn't agree to the terms and war broke out, they'd be stripped back again. So by the time the Treaty of Versailles was agreed in January 1919 and signed in June of 1919, that's why you'll find the gratuities and the war pensions all are paid off that. The official war at the end was on an act of parliament sometime in 1921. So you will find that some of the men, particularly you'll find if you go into some of the graveyards, particularly around Belfast and so on, you'll see dates after that. While you were a serving member and you died in service, whether you were at home or you were convalescent, you received a Commonwealth War Graves headstone. The one that's poignant here is if you go to the old churchyard in Derrykeegan, there's a wee guy called John Meek. His brother Samuel Meek was a prisoner of war, and he came home. He had worked in the sulphur mines in Germany well, because he was taken as a prisoner of war, and he lasted 2 weeks. And he succumbed to the hardships of working in the sulphur mines. John Meakin, however, he did get home. He died sometime again, just after the war, about 1920-21. He's in the graveyard somewhere, but his commemoration of his stone is there. So that's the reason why you'll find the medals also are, 1914 to 1920 for the British War Medal, and 1914 to 1919 for the British Victory Medal. So that's the reason behind it. It wasn't just, it was different to the First, Second World War, where Germany signed the unconditional surrender. That was it. They had to agree to everything. Whereas in the First World War, they had to actually negotiate. In fact, it's often said that the Germans couldn't understand why the Treaty of Versailles was thrust upon them, because they didn't start the war, and also there wasn't an Allied stepped foot in Germany, so they could understand why they were at fault, and that's also a reason. So, any comments?
Just a comment regards your photograph there of Feet for Wood and the Schwab Redoubt. And it's not evident from that photograph. I visited a number of years ago, and at 7:30 in an April morning, I went down to the edge of the wood and walked out at 7:30, sort of replicating the time of it. And I was actually amazed that the sun was actually rising over the Schwab Redoubt, so it was in my eyes, so I couldn't really see that well. And obviously, from a German perspective, you'd be lit up like rabbits in the headlight. Plus the fact which can't be seen there is there's a slight incline there. You're going up there under gunfire, light, slope, heavy gear. It just wasn't a stroll in the park.
A very good observation, Alan.
Yeah.
You're quite right. The other thing that we found out recently, David and I went to a talk in the Southern Heritage Centre. It was unbelievably how accurate the Germans were. They, as Alan says there, the field of fire was unreal. They picked the ground first because they beat the French away from it, so they could actually set up where they wanted to set up. They also had listening devices. They dug in below the ground, right up as close to Thiepval as they could, and they had German-speaking men who wrote everything down, and the telephone cables were buried. They could listen to anything going through those cables at a 2-kilometre radius, and they knew exactly on the 1st of July. You can understand why it failed when you read and understand that the Germans knew exactly what they were doing. They often talked about on the Schwab Redoubt that there was an excellent dugout. The tunnel was actually down further near where the Ballymena men were, because the problem on the first, they got out, and many of the men got so far. In fact, Bob Grange from Ballyclare said that some of the men from the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers got 3 miles into the racks as far as the D-line. What happened was then the Germans caught on. They actually were being shot at with the Germans turning the guns on them, their own artillery and the German artillery. So it was quite a terrible time. You can understand why men came home and never talked about it. And especially if you look at the way Langmark was, that's it. Anybody else?
I heard a story one time actually in relation to the scenes. Matter of fact, it was actually the Service Club. That the scenes, one of the gentlemen who was involved in planning the scenes was Jimmy McCreesh, who was originally from South Armagh, lived in Newcastle. He was a miner, and he joined the military, shall we say. And they were talking about it actually, and he was one of those involved actually in thinking about how we could actually explode all the mines, as you know, at the same time that occurred in London. And he eventually was, I say, part of those actually who planned that or was involved in the thought for the tactics. He was actually a great uncle of Raymond McCreesh, the hunger striker.
I've heard this story too. He's buried in Bedford House Cemetery. You're quite right. He lived originally in Camelot, South Armagh, went to live in Durham, and it was quickly discovered that fighting the Germans above ground was a real problem, and it was the Germans actually defected the idea of digging below. Sap means sapper, and if Jack is about here, she'll be able to pronounce it in French. but it's the French word for spade. Saps were originally from a medieval time when you actually dug below your enemy, castles and so on, and then come up from below. John McCreesh says he was an expert in mining because that's what he did in Durham. He was a miner, and he actually trained the men to tunnel. He actually worked on the Loch Nagar crater as part of a team which was on the Somme. Loch Nagar crater is still there if you go to it this day. Thankfully, a man called Richard Bunting bought the actual land on it before it was going to be filled in 1976. So we're lucky we still have that. It doesn't belong to the Commonwealth Workers Commission, but it belongs to an association now, and it's one of the few that's still there. The Hawthorne mine crater is the same, but it's being tidied up and it's quite close to the sun as well. But you're quite right. I've also heard that story. He was quite a character because he actually took to do with the safety of miners and the tunnelling companies, and he would have went round and eventually would have done the various talks. And the reason he was blew up was around on shell while he was been just at the top, and he was on his way back, and a shell landed in amongst him and killed him. And I say he's buried in Bedford House Cemetery near Derry. He was. There's a story also goes that there was 10 men in a cave-in, and he and his team dug for a week and found one man alive. So that's the other side of the coin as well. Yeah. So they do. You do hear the lovely stories. You know, I tell one there where there's a lieutenant wheeler in one of the southern regiments, and in the mass chase back from where the front was back toward, because of the actual German spring offensive in 1918, the speed that the Germans were taking the ground. This particular battalion, 250 men, had been surrounded. So they went up to do this reckoning of the bridge and discovered 2 German sentries on it. And the story goes, Lieutenant Wheeler says to his sergeant, "Go and get Byrne." "Sir, go and get Byrne, you'll know why I need him." So they marched down the road. "Right, Byrne, are you ready?" So with a swift left hook and a swift right hook, he took out the 2 German sentries, and 250 men got across the bridge and away from captivity. Private Byrne was the battalion boxer, championship boxer. So there wasn't a shot fired when we saved 250 men. So there you go.
Can I bring you to a stop? So
Oh, yes.
I know we're going on. I hope you enjoyed that. By the way, I know I've been very interested because David, who's working with Andrew down there, he does tours of Ypres, Somme, all that, and my husband and I tend to go with him. If anybody's interested, that sort of thing, have a wee chat to David down there. The one story I always remember is about the 2 Thompson brothers, and Roberta told me this years ago, but she probably doesn't remember, was that the grandmother, they lived in a farm, and you know the way the cyclists come up with the little note saying your son is dead, and as that cyclist was going down the road, another one was going up to say your other son is dead.
Oh my goodness.
But it just gives tingles to my spine, you know, when I hear it. Please go, if you haven't been to Andrew's bit there, because he has all the histories of the people on the mural that's in the church, and he can give you a rundown of a lot of them went to Canada, some of them were a wee bit iffy, right? But if anybody knows anything, please let us know that so we can continue. But the research will go on, believe me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That's a set of axle medals belonging to a man called McCoy. Is given to by a friend, and this is the axle set. This is actually a true set. The man's name and all's in the back of them. But they didn't do that in the Second World War, but they certainly did that in the First World War. And one of the methods of research is your medal index cards, which were sent off by the army to the various medal manufacturers. He won the military medal, and this one here is the actual 1914 star, your British War Medal, and then your Victory Medal. There's something like 5 million of these were made, each one. The one that's unique to that one is called the 1914 star. That was where all the old Contemptibles went away, and if you were involved in gunfire, you would have got a clasp on your medal. And it was seen at that time that in England they used to call them funny names. Pipsqueak and Wilfred, you've heard the story. And it was after cartoon characters at that time in the newspapers. And I often watch videos of Mark Smith, and he would say, well then, what do you call those two then? Well, if you only got those two, they were called Mutt and Jeff. The reason they called them Pipsqueak and Wilfred was because you're always shouted at, you're always cold, you're always hungry. And I thought, that's us. Mutt and Jeff were also a bit sort of, the one that saw the couple of these idiots, and they were called the same thing. So the strange thing about it was, the people who got the 3 looked down on the ones who actually got the 2. But you have to remember, from the 1st of July 1916 to the end of the war was some of the serious battles, and they only got 2 medals, whereas the other guys only got 3. I say this guy got the military medals, so he got a wee bit extra.
Yeah, but the ground is that, those 4.
There you are. That's unique. It is. And he's got it, he'll got the certificate as well then, will he?
I'll see you again someday.
And they made the bar, come to the gym, she got 6 euros.